Hey, everybody. My guest on the show today is the amazing Matt Gerlach. Matt is an advocate. He's an author. He is a facilitator amongst a variety of other things. And I would say maybe a recovering business owner in some ways. We'll talk about that, Matt, today. Matt, I'm so glad you're here. Just to give the audience a little bit of context, Matt and I got connected. We had a really awesome conversation last week. We are connected through a circle where we know some people in common. I said, I got to have you on. So Matt, I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Glad I'm here as well. Thanks, Jason.
Excellent. So Matt, where are you joining us from?
I'm in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles. I'm over here in New York. So I was just talking on another podcast about how cool it is that you can interview people from around the world or across the country. And we're here. So yeah, your time, it's just having lunchtime. We're wrapping up the day over here in the East Coast. At least I am soon. So Matt, let's first of all just get to know you a little bit. What would you like the audience to know about you to kick off here?
Sure. All right. Well, so I am an entrepreneur. I started a business about 7 years ago. It's a consulting services business. And boy, did I offer my services.
That's very leading. I cannot wait to hear where we're going with that.
When I started this business, I was, it's an honest business, good people around me. It's actually in baby products. So I help baby product manufacturers and brands with their business growth and wholesale management and growth strategy, ongoing supervision and service providing. And when I started this business, I was hit right smack dab with a bus of needing to deal with my trauma. And it presented itself right when I started the business. I was not able to set boundaries. I was not able to say no. Choosing the right clients. What is that? You just say yes to everything that comes your way. And it was really driven by this place of scarcity. When I look back at my whole life, I've been a saver my whole life. I never really made good money until I started this business. I mean, I made good money, but no better than average. And so I only, I came from a pretty blue collar family, hardworking family. I didn't really know that there was people out in the world that made good money. I thought, well, I moved to New York as well. So in 2010, I moved there and I thought rich business people made $100,000. Doctors and lawyers made $200,000.
Yeah. And then you sit at the bar or restaurant and hear people talking about money on the East Coast and you go, that's a lot of money. That was my experience too, as moving to New York. I think we talked about that last week.
Yeah. And so, I never really I just, you needed more money. You just worked more. You worked harder throughout high school. I worked, honestly, 35, 40 hours a week through almost all of high school and college. I was working at a hospital, 16 and 24-hour shifts on the weekends during college, falling asleep while driving. It was just insane. And I did this because, I was just on my own. I have my family. I think that there was a mix between they saved a lot of their money. There was not a lot of enjoying today. And also, I think that a lot of it was they struggled and they thought it would be helpful for me to struggle. And I've completely changed my life because of this. I definitely don't have a lot of regrets. I don't wish things were that different than they were. I've grown some very thick skin. I absolutely believe that that people that have been through hard things are the people that are changing the world, and I'm grateful for that. I think the only thing that I really would say is that I wish there was a little more help, because at the end of the day, I just turned on myself, and that wasn't a lesson that was the hardest lesson, just turning on myself and never being okay with myself, because I always thought that I wasn't good enough.
Yeah. So when you were talking about the childhood trauma and then moving into an entrepreneurial role, and I relate to a lot of your story. I grew up in also very middle class, and I worked a lot. I always I liked to make money, and I had no concept of 100,000, 200,000. I certainly didn't make that, but I also worked a lot in high school. I worked a lot in college, and I think I derived a lot of my value from that, of the idea of being a quote unquote hard worker. I'm curious for you, as we talk about bringing the trauma into your work as an entrepreneur, and we're going to talk later about how you now work with people doing that. That's something that you have a passion for. And I think we talk about this kind of like what you're here to do now on this planet. Do you remember the moment where you became present to this? Because I would assert it's so easy for many people never to realize that's what's actually going on.
I
Like
don't
the
think
moment where you go, "Oh my God."
I think things have to get bad enough. And I think, I said this a couple years ago, and it was with my coach, and she was like, "Well, like this is really profound." A lot of people, I think, just skate north of rock bottom, and they don't quite get there.
Ooh,
Like it's
that's good.
and I'm grateful that I got there. And my rock bottom was not everyone's rock bottom. It wasn't horrible, but yeah. So I mean, driving this business to success, the big part of this was like I couldn't set boundaries, and I learned that I was very intimidated by men in power. And because growing up, that was always, there was never any sort of like healthy disagreements. It was always like a man in power was very scary for me. So
Mm.
I couldn't set boundaries. I couldn't say no. And I was just driving myself crazy because I was working around the clock trying to just, I had 5 clients, I think, maybe even 6 at the peak. And I just treated them all like it was my own business. And like I was going to be the one filing for bankruptcy if the businesses went under. And like really what I offered my clients at the beginning was like I was this scrappy guy that came in and treated these businesses like it was my own. And I'm like, okay, you give me lemons, I'm gonna take it into lemonade and sell
Yeah.
this stuff. And I did. And so yeah, so when my partner and I moved from New York to LA, he wanted to move. I didn't want to, but in relationships you eventually compromise. So we did.
Yeah. Yep.
The first night, about 4 hours after we landed at LAX, we were at our apartment unpacking, and I started to feel dizzy. And I checked my blood pressure. I'd been diagnosed with high blood pressure a few months prior to all this, and my blood pressure was like 190 over 110. And
Wow, Matt.
and I called my
Wow.
doctor, and he was like, "You got to go to the hospital." I had chest pain, and so I spent my first night in LA in the hospital. Checked in
Your
the
first
hospital.
night. Wow.
Yeah. And then after that, I mean, I knew that I had to do something. So I was following up with tons of doctors, and still like no one really, this whole like idea of mental health debilitating somebody was like, I can't even put it into words. Like it was such a foreign concept. Like emotional health was never really anything that like I had no exposure to that being any reason to slow down. I mean, emotional health, like unless your leg is falling off, you better be, going to work. And so it took like 9 months probably for me to really let that sink in. And I'd been in therapy for, 10 years. I don't know what we were talking about because certainly I wasn't, wasn't resonating that emotional hardship could,
Yeah.
could get
If I
where I,
Matt, if I could give you something here, so I'm gonna interject with the what was I doing there? I've heard this described as you were running your own game inside of therapy. Like you were talking about the the problem of the day or maybe the problem of the week, but just not getting there. And my guess is if you were with a therapist for 10 years, you liked them and thought they were good, you were not allowing yourself to get there. It wasn't anything they could do. It's like, but I love the idea of like, yeah, you're running a game on your therapist, you're running a game on your coach, because you're actually running a game on yourself is what you're doing. Yeah.
well, yeah, thank you for that. And I'm kind of like, I wish I could read these journals because I've been journaling like for, this whole process. And I
Mm-hmm.
wish I could faster. It's like my own handwriting. It's chicken scratch, but I do read them. I spend maybe an hour or two a week. And right now, I'm at the journal where I'm reading a lot about this stuff, and it's like it's exactly what you said. Like I'm kind of telling the story that I want to. The story that I feel safe, and I'm really overwhelmed. I got to make dinner tonight, or something like that. When it's like the
Yeah.
reality. And still, this has been 10 years in the mix, and I would say it's really only been maybe the past year or so that I really understood that all of this overwhelm, all of this feeling of inadequacy, this never allowing myself to be anything but perfect, it was all trauma. And it was the
Yeah.
only thing in life I couldn't figure out. Like if you were to say, "Hey Matt, like, you're doing this wrong," like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." And it's just like everyone's like, "You're so hard on yourself." And I'm like, okay, anyways, don't know what to do with that at all.
You're like, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for the idea. Yeah.
And yeah, so just to kind of wrap that up real quick, like
Mhm.
I started having panic attacks while driving, and that was really what debilitated
Wow.
me because I got to the
Like a
place.
real, like a physical panic attack, like shortness of, like the actual physiological reaction.
Yeah, I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea that mental emotional health could have made somebody feel as bad as I did. So I was just convinced I was dying. I literally would have bet $1 million at
Wow.
35 years old that I wouldn't have lived to see I'm 40. I thought I
Yeah.
had a brain tumor, that I had lung cancer, or whatever it might be. And so when this happened, I just started chasing. I was literally in a doctor's office, every other day for weeks at a time. Like, you've got to find what's wrong with me. And in reality, I'm writing a book. I think this will be the second book, kind of a little bit more awareness of this, because there's a lot of humility about it now. But like, I
Yeah.
don't think I would have been debilitated from from driving the way that I was, had I known it was a panic attack and just been able to process that. But I thought I was dying, and that I could
Yeah.
visualize myself just killing a bunch of people. And
Oh, Matt, I have a question for you. We've talked about the business and like your business life. I'm really curious how the trauma and the lack of boundaries, how did that show up in your relationship? And what's been the effect for you and your partner as you've been working on this? Because I say this because I know that this is not an easy thing for a partner to be with. And I'm talking about oh, wait a second. All the things that I used to have my partner be able to just do for me, or like with no pushback, suddenly there's like more of a, like, they're standing for themselves. That's not necessarily easy for the people in our lives to handle, or they don't like it. And I'm speaking for myself. I don't always like it when people that are in my life are like, oh, wait, but that boundary wasn't there. And it was so much easier when you didn't have that boundary. So how have you two worked on that? Because I find that just can be a really stressful thing.
I'm really happy you asked that question. I've never really been asked that or been given this chance to reflect on it. And I want to be careful not to like over embellish, but it wasn't horrible at all. I mean, I think that I'm very lucky that I found a supportive partner. I think that he has, his, I don't want to say baggage, but he has his, like, he's probably a little more of I'm just kind of saying, I mean, he might be a little more of a people pleaser. He might be a little more compassionate and care about people than somebody might. Like, if I would have had a jerk as a partner, we probably wouldn't be together. But I think he really loves me, and he really, I mean, it was really hard, like, for me. I mean, I think him seeing me in so much torture and so much pain, and like, there was a few, I've just kind of started talking about this the past couple of weeks, but there was a few times where like I got so, and this is only 5 years ago or so, 6 years ago, where I would get so hard on myself that I would like literally turn inward. And there was like a couple of times when I had to say, like, I'm afraid I'm going to hurt myself. And I didn't.
And you just said that to yourself, or you said it out loud to somebody else?
I told him that.
Oh, wow.
It was like when I was processing all of this grief, and it was like, I remember it was like almost like a cleansing. Like, it was, because I never really had felt like, I never had that level of clarity to it. And like, it was like, it was like him and I had a disagreement, and like, we've had a couple of like fights, but like, in reality, it's just mainly pretty healthy disagreements, and it's like, I was like, I think like this disagreement, like, it was like, no one was wrong. It was just a disagreement. And like, I was growing and learning that I wasn't wrong. So like, I felt like I was like, and I wasn't used to not being wrong. So I was like turning on myself, like feeling like it. I mean, it almost hurt worse to not take the blame and to just like be like, this is nobody's fault right now. Or, I mean, sometimes it might have been his fault more than it was mine. I just was so used to always having it be my fault. So he really, I mean, I would say that if anything, it was more difficult probably for him to watch me really go through the healing process of trauma than it was for me to put boundaries up in our relationship.
Yeah.
And like, it took me a while to put a lot of boundaries, and there weren't like dramatic boundaries to put up. I mean, I think that like, really, like, it was things like, it was really, I mean, this is like really, I don't want to say embarrassing, because vulnerability is my superpower. I'm fine with this, but this is deep, like, there were times when it's like, like, I'm having a birthday party. Who do I invite? What do I do? Like, I couldn't make decisions like that for myself very easily. And like, so it was more like having to work through those kinds of things than it was me saying, you are not doing this anymore. Like, I think we have a pretty contemporary relationship. There's not a lot of.
You're not doing this. Yeah, that's good. I mean, it's good that you got there. I'm also really curious about when you say turning on yourself. I'd love if you would expand upon that for us. Like, what was that? If people didn't know what that meant, what do you mean by that? And what was that experience like for you, like on the inside?
No, it was horrible. Turning on myself. What does that mean? It means like not having compassion for myself at all. Like when there was something going on, I'd rather I would rather hurt than have the other person hurt. I would
Mm,
rather be the one in pain than have somebody else hurt, even if they did something to deserve. I don't want to say the word deserve, but if somebody did something wrong, like it's always easier for me to be the one suffering, to be the one blaming rather than to make that person grow or to make them be accountable for what they did. So like in situations where like me and you have a fight, Jason, and it's like, you're wrong. Like I don't want to use the word wrong, but you've done more to precipitate the fight than I have. And rather than deal with your discomfort, maybe you yelling, maybe you walking out the door, whatever it might be, I'd rather just be the person to absorb that all because it's easier. That's what I'm used to. It was easier to do that than it is to like experience someone abandoning me, I guess is what it comes down to.
yeah, that's what I
Abandonment.
hear. I was just listening to another podcast. Somebody was interviewed on it's a more of a therapist podcast where she actually got therapy about this anonymously. And the output of that for her was one, same thing, easier, easier to take on the pain for herself or abandon herself so that she felt connected and comforted and loved by others. And she was left with nothing for herself at the end of the day. And like you said, I really like what you said about skating skating just above rock bottom, right? Is what you said. Your coach is right. That's a broad. I am going to steal that. Whoever your coach is, Matt, I'm going to steal that. That it's so true, and I've been there too. So I'm not saying I'm perfect over here. Like where you're just operating almost purely from automatic is how I would call that. And as somebody who's a smart person who's done good work, you had a successful business and you're working on successful business now, like there are things you just know how to do, but that's all you're able to do, right? It's not a mindful thing. You're not present. It's like you're just operating on top of like what's the automatic thing, because there's a lot of automatic things we all know how to do that really serve us in some ways.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
going back to something I asked before, I'm curious, was there a moment for you, or was this something that was like the LA going to the hospital? Were you present is when it happened that like this is a sign that something's seriously wrong, or was there something more that had to happen? Because I know, I mean, you probably know people like this too. I certainly do. They'll have a big event like that, and they'll be like, I got it fixed," and they're right back to the same old, and then they hit something else again.
I definitely wasn't right back to the same old, same old. I mean, I was in doctor's offices all the time and I was freaking out. I mean,
Yeah.
like I was in, I was checking my blood pressure at home and, there was probably a dozen or more times that I would just call my cardiologist and be like, I have to come see you. My blood pressure was high. And so I was really chasing down medical problems. And then finally it was this like big staunch neurologist who was like such a jerk. And he was the one that like finally said, he's like, I don't want to ever see you again. Don't come back here. What you're dealing with is plain old anxiety. You don't need me. And so he made me clear that what I was going through was anxiety. And that I think that really opened the floodgates to like a medical doctor had really said that. I was in yoga teacher training at the same time as well. So I mean, I was really pursuing the holistic path. I don't know where I really got this holistic bone in my body, but I'm very much
Yeah.
into, I mean, like I've been meditating for years. That was part of the process, journaling, yoga teacher training. The teacher I had was just highly philosophical. So that made a lot of sense to me. And just
Mm,
being like in this yoga teacher training, like, you're in a room with 10, 12 people, maybe more than that,
yeah.
depending who you're with. And it was really the first time that like that I was with people that were really sharing emotions like this, that I mean, I guess like I always thought that there had to be something bigger. Like I had to have something horrific happen to feel any emotional pain, and being a man also. I mean, that was a big part of
Yeah.
my narrative. Men aren't supposed to have any problems like this. So this was all like leading up to my partner and I were in couples therapy, and we had like this really good couples therapist who was like really aggressive and not like with us, but like would kind of just tell us how it was, and it was good because my
So
partner had never.
useful.
It was
As opposed to like, so Matt, how do you feel about that? You're like, listen, I'm hearing that this is bullshit. There's a lot of bullshit going on here.
Yeah, so she really like I started to like go from this like therapy to like I needed people to validate like what is going on, like, tell me what like what you're seeing, and I started to see that. And then it was in a couples therapy session with her where the three of us realized that I was not able to ask for what I needed because I was ashamed by my needs. And that was like, we said earlier that like I was very open to hearing that story and to hearing that be where things were at. And so that was probably the moment where I was like, I hadn't been able to drive on the freeway for, a year and a half by that point. My life was just completely
In
like,
LA?
yeah. I was Ubering all
Holy
around.
shit.
Yeah. I mean, I was
Wow.
traveling the world. I was on airplanes all the time
Yeah.
for work, for my business. So like I would laugh. I'd be like, I just can't believe that I could, leave my house in an Uber and, 8 hours later be getting to my hotel in Manhattan and like,
Yeah.
it was normal. I'm not driving at all, and just like how
Yeah.
I was in Japan, all over the world, like doing this, like conducting life as normal. And it was easier to be anywhere than it was to be at home driving to the grocery store. And
Yeah.
yeah, and
Matt, sorry, I have a question about something that just struck me.
sure.
It happened the first day you got to California.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who has also lived in New York for a long time, one thing that I've realized for myself is that New York is an easy place to mask because it's so people and things to do, and there's so entertaining, and there's so many. I don't like to call them they're distractions for maybe like focusing inward. I just find it arguably the best place in the world to focus externally because it's just overload all the time. I'm curious if there was something about the move itself or leaving or mentally leaving the New York space that had you all that also triggered something for you. If you've ever, I don't know if you've worked through that or if you've ever thought about it, but I know for me personally, I've certainly felt that it's a great place to be distracted from what's actually going on.
I would call it like the adult playground. I mean, it really
It is,
is.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I
It's like
mean,
the adult playground. It's as I think of it as like Vegas is great for a few days, and most people I know go to Vegas for a few days and they're like, I got to get out of here. There's people that never want to leave New York, like never leave Manhattan. They're like, this is just amazing. And I'm not even talking about partying. I'm just talking about all the stuff to do it's got everything you could ever want. So I'm curious if that was something that your brain's like, and you live in LA, which is also an amazing place with never ending things to do, but there's more space and
yeah.
more driving. And yeah, it's not the same as New York, obviously. What do you think there's anything about the geographic change that created something for you?
There was two things about the move, and I think, yeah, I mean, in New York, like, like you really, if you want your career to happen and you're driven in New York, I mean, the sky is the absolute limit, I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's not going to happen from sitting at your desk looking pretty. I mean, but if you can finagle your way through back doors and get yourself, at the right table, you can do anything you want there. And with that, work hard, play hard culture. I mean, I worked at,
Yep.
I worked in, entrepreneurial companies my whole time there. We celebrated, we had a lot of fun. There was always alcohol. A big part of my story has been, I would call it numbing a lot of this with alcohol. And around the time that I was moving back to Los Angeles, like, I had high blood pressure. That was part of it. I mean, my body was telling me it was time to stop. I smoked cigarettes all the time. I mean, life was really, I was very hard on my body. And part of my business success was that I was always the life of the party. I could always hold my alcohol pretty well. So like I could go from happy hour to dinner to do all the entertaining and everything that needed to be done to make everyone like me.
Yeah.
All of that coming to an end, the masking of everything. And then I was coming back to the town that I'm from. I grew up in a suburb of Pasadena, and what was waiting for me was a lot of childhood trauma that I never had processed. I mean, there was a
Mm.
lot that happened at home that I really wish would not have been the case. And I had a very hard time at school. I was completely abandoned with no friends, like not even a friend's birthday party for 3 years. And
No,
it was horrible.
sorry. Yeah.
Even that in and of itself, I mean, no one really, I don't remember any adult like ever really noticing that was going on. And the story that I remember would be that I hid that because I was just too ashamed and embarrassed that if adults found out, then but yeah, I mean, I was coming home to a situation that I'd left, and felt
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. So Matt, let's take a pivot here into what's up with you today. This is obviously what you're describing is a lifelong journey. Lifelong journey. I'm sure there's still times where you go, "Oh my God!" You see, I'm speaking for me. There's still times, and I've done a lot of work. I don't have a lot of the same things you do, but I have my own stuff, right? We all do. Where there's certain days where I'm like, "Oh, right back to my old thing. There it is. There's the thing." So I'm guessing that happens for you. But what are you up to now, as you've done that work, therapy, coaching, moving, having to look at these things? What's your passion now, and what are you working on?
I love learning. I love growing. Growth would be my number one value in life. So, I mean, I read, a book a week. Normally, I'm listening to podcasts and engaging in conversations any way I can to learn. And I love it. And I started writing a book about 3 years ago. And it's a memoir of my life, which has pretty much been like the nail in the coffin of my healing journey. I hired a writing coach in 2020.
Nice.
And that was what really, like, putting this on paper and really, like, it was more vulnerable than therapy. Like I had to share it with somebody. Here's what I wrote this week. Here's
Not just somebody, Matt. You're writing a book. There will probably be a lot of people who will you'll be sharing this with. People you will never meet, which is amazing.
That's the plan. I mean, that's the plan. Writing a book is a lot. I mean, I'm enjoying it very much. But, so as I've writing this book, it's really, it's been healing in a way that I had never expected to be healed. And I've learned forgiveness. I've gone through this whole thing. I mean, I don't have any animosity anymore. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I'm in this writing group right now and I'm writing this essay. And then at the end of it, I said, I no longer feel anxiety or depression. Also knowing that life isn't linear and things will happen. But they were like, this is not believable. And I really, contemplated that for a moment. And I'm like, true. True, but also I feel that way. And I think it's like, I felt so horrible for so long that it feels like I have no anxiety or depression anymore. And I want to help people with this. I've been an entrepreneur with my own business for the past 7 years. And then I've been working for entrepreneurs for the past almost 15. And I have seen entrepreneurship be so liberating. It offers you the freedom to create a life that you want. And I've made a lot of money. I have had a couple of years, over the past couple of years, I've made over $1 million a year with my own consulting business. And I want to help other entrepreneurs, other people become entrepreneurs. So I am leaning heavily into that through a coaching business I started about 6 months ago. The more that I'm really diving into this, I'm feeling myself called to trauma work, to really helping people, not probably with the healing of trauma per se. I don't see myself going back to school for something like that. But I think where people get stuck with trauma is they don't know what they went through was trauma. I remember, if I can share a small story about this.
Oh, of course.
I remember I had lunch with a family member. This was this was maybe, I don't know, 4 years ago, we'll say. And I took the dog for a walk after dinner or lunch, which we were there for hours. And I was walking across the street and a question popped into my mind. I had thought about this hundreds of times. I had thought and I hate to be so graphic, but I'd always kind of thought
Please.
One of the worst traumas would be a woman getting raped. So that was kind of like my the big T trauma that I latched onto. And I was thinking, why would a woman not say that she has been abused? Why wouldn't she be able to say that? And we've heard, millions of stories about people that don't.
Yeah.
And I thought about this hundreds, thousands of times. And then all of a sudden, I remember exactly where I was at making that step. And I was like, they don't realize they've been abused. And that's the story. I mean, that's the help that people need. There's a lot of help out there for people that realize that, but it's very hard to leave a relationship. It's hard to acknowledge that people who love you also can do things that they shouldn't do to you. And that's one of the things, like in yoga we were taught. There's a much more eloquent way to say this, but my yoga teacher said this: it's both. Life is so much of both. Like, you can be loved and you can be abused. You could be loved, you could be hated. I mean, it goes on. Like, and I think that offers a lot of freedom, because you're able to, as the victim or the person that's been abused, you're able to find a path forward with that. But also, like, there's a forgiveness with that too. Like, no one's perfect, and I think that so much of the healing or the processing of trauma is at the start of it, which is something I consider myself quite adept in. It's the acknowledging of it, the learning of it, and the accepting that, like, there is a path to have that person still in your life, perhaps, but you need to be willing to put the boundary up and be willing to, in some cases, that going to need to be incriminated for what they did. And then at the end, apologies rarely come. And, I'm fine with that. I mean, it's, like, and there's so much help out there for that as well, too. I'm reading Marianne Williamson. Someone just brought her to me, and I'm reading her book. I forget the name of it, but it's the most popular one. And last night was the chapter on relationships. And it's like, it's just, I said to myself, like, they know not what they do. Like, they don't know what they're doing. And
that's Jesus said that in the Bible as he was being crucified. Yeah, it's very biblical.
They know not what they do.
Forgive them. Yeah, forgive them. They know not what they do. Right. Yep. Yeah, Matt. This is so. I was telling you this a couple hours ago. I was interviewing my friend Dr. Eugene K. Choi, who's been on the podcast a few times, also in LA. So we got a theme here. Just randomly happened that way. And one of his. He's a coach who really focuses on neuroscience. So he's a pharmacist, which is why he's a doctor. He takes a really scientific approach. And we were talking a lot about your executive state and your survival state. And you said something there that came up in our conversation as well, is that in survival state, our brain really hates the cognitive dissonance of, you know what, Matt? It's possible that you did some bad things, but you're still lovable. Or it's possible, like, our brain in its most simple state hates that because it doesn't know what to do with it at a very base level, which is also what makes us as humans unique than almost, I think, every other animal on the planet, is the idea that both of these things can be completely true. And what do we do with that? And in our executive state, we go critical thinking, empathy, connection. In our survival state, our brain goes, well, those both can't be true. You're a fucking asshole or you're lovable, but there's no way you're both in a relationship. And I'm sure you felt that way. Like, I know I feel that way. And like, just the idea that our brain loves the black and white, the us versus them, the either or context, because it's so much more simple. And at the end of the day, Eugene is like, our brain burns less calories processing it, which is what our brain is trained to do, or was trained to do a long time ago. And now we just happen to be evolved in some ways, and in other ways we're not at all.
Yeah. I mean, shame is a huge part of my story. I mean, it's a huge part of a lot of stories. And when I really started down this healing journey, I mean, I found a Brene Brown book. A woman friend of mine recommended her, and I just read those journals from that time. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, this is when it all started making sense. Like, what I'm struggling with is that I have so much shame, and I was able to forgive other people before I forgave myself. I think the forgiveness of myself has just come recently.
Good.
But yeah, we all have shame, and that's all. I mean, it's a horrible thing. Sure. I mean, no one wants to hurt anybody, but I
think there are some people that may want to hurt other. There are certain people that probably want to hurt other people. That's all. Well, it's all they know how to do, right? That's the only way they know how to assert power is through pain.
And like, I mean, I see this come up for me sometimes. Like the other day, I was talking to somebody, and I said something that they disagreed with, and I'm still a little bit of a novice and having healthy disagreements here. So like I'm a little careful, and it was someone I really care about. And like what I notice now is it's like I have the opportunity when that happens, when I'm feeling like I want to not leave that open, like I don't want to walk away and be like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. that's when I deal with it. And I said, not I'm sorry if I offended you so much. It was more I'm sorry if what
Mm,
I said wasn't appropriate, or I'm sorry if what I said, like, I'm sorry if I approached this in a way that hurt you. Like, I think it's nice to say, like, I'm sorry. What did I say? I'm sorry if I offended you. That's saying, well, I'm sorry if you're too sensitive, or I'm sorry if you're
totally.
like, I was genuinely sorry that in the presence of him, I said something that might have come out that might have hurt him. And I was very open. The topic was something he knew a lot more about than I did in the first place. And he was like, no, it's fine. And then I said, I wanted to make sure I really cared about the person, and I wanted to make sure that.
Yeah.
So we're all offered those opportunities. Like when you're at work and
Oh
you hurt
God, yeah.
somebody's feelings, you have that opportunity to say, like, hey, like, I care about you in this relationship, and I might be your boss, but I still don't need to throw my weight around.
Yeah, man, you said something there that really struck a chord with me. And through the coach training I went to, we call that owning your side of the street. And for me as well, just speaking for myself, the dance between owning your side of the street without becoming a people pleaser is so easy to go to the other side. How it sounds like this is something you did. I'll do. Oh, I'm so sorry I said that, but I'm actually not sorry I said that. What I'm sorry is that you made it feel a certain way. And what I hear is like just the elevation of the conversation where you get to be you and speak your like own your truth, but also own that it potentially had an impact on somebody is different than I'm sorry I made you feel bad when I spoke my truth that I still truly believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is and the way I see this topic right now is what we're talking about is the overarching problem with humanity and the problem with politics in every country, especially America, is like we can actually disagree and still say this person has good intentions most of the time. Yeah, I really appreciate it. So Matt, let's talk about I have no doubt there are people listening here that go, I felt this way or I feel this way right now. And I'm driven in my business or I'm driven in my life and or personally at home. Where would you suggest people start? Because you said something really amazing that has really stuck with me since you said it. Once you're aware, there's a million resources.
Mhm.
But a lot of people, I would assert, are either not aware or they have an inkling, but they don't know what to do next. And I'm talking about the burnout, the shame, the feeling, the things that you've described about how you feel and noticing about yourself. As you're working with people, where would you recommend people start? Like what's something that people can do today or tomorrow?
I think that, I really appreciate this question. I wish I had my journal in front of me. There was something I read this morning that, like, I had like 5 steps that was just like something I knew 5 years ago that was just, so I'm going to try to like reiterate that. But, you know, it's like you go with the path of least resistance,
Yeah.
like, I think it's like getting, and I want to say this effectively because it's really important. I think the hardest part of any sort of healing journey is the acknowledgement to yourself that there's something to heal. So,
Mm,
and that's the hardest thing, and I don't think we get there on our own. Like, I don't think that anybody fully gets there on their own. They might, I'm a huge reader. I don't watch as much TV or movies, but you can learn just as much in terms of people's lives and stories from that. I just happened to be watching Fried Green Tomatoes last night. I'm a
well,
never,
look at
yeah, and it's just
yeah.
like there's millions of movies out there that are just like full of
Yeah.
lessons. And like when you're at that moment where something like that hits you, where you're like, gosh, like, this happened to me, it happened to her, and she got help, or she told her mom, and her mom, came in and called the police, or like when these things happen, these are the moments to like actually do something. And whether that's writing something down, like, and saying, tomorrow I'm going to call the therapist, you've got to like start getting the message out of you. And that might, for some people, just start with writing it down. And it might start with writing it down and burning it because you're too afraid to let somebody see it. It might be
Totally.
whispering into the bathroom mirror. It might be, if you're really, really, really lucky and brave, you might talk to a friend or a family member about it. Like,
Mm.
that's it's gonna start changing when you start letting people in. And I think back to, like, I was just writing about this morning in my book, and it's like, how many times, like, I would tell a therapist or a friend something like, hey, like, this person did this to me, and then they would, like, try to tell me, like, Matt, like, that's not good, and I would backpedal and try to, like, defend that person.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, the goal is that you need to get that feedback from other people. And generally, I would say that I have talked to probably no less than 1,000 people on my healing journey. I don't remember really any unhelpful or bad advice. Like, nobody
Yeah.
really said, crawl back into a hole because you're an asshole. Like,
Yeah. Nobody. Yeah. Yeah.
people might have said more
Although,
helpful
yeah.
things than
Yeah.
others,
Go.
but, like, it really is just getting it out of you. And if it take, I mean, it took me a couple of years of writing this down in journals before I really talked about things that I needed to talk about. You know, they say the best time to plant a tree was yesterday, but the second best time or the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. So it's
Yeah.
like, once you start getting this out of you and getting it onto paper, you look back at it, like, you start noticing patterns. That is the key. You got to just get it out of you. And, I mean, the tall order is that you get a therapist, or you tell your doctor, or you tell someone who's actually trained in this, and you're receptive to them and you're able to listen to them. And when they tell you you are in an abusive relationship, or your boss is abusing you, or he's crazy, like, I think back, I'm going through some career changes right now and changing up my consulting business, moving much more into my purpose-driven work. Super
There you
exciting.
go. Yeah.
And I felt like, so I have been ready for this for a while. And as I'm really reflecting on the past several years of wanting to do this, nothing's really changed externally. It's been internally that I am brave enough to do it. Like, we all
Mm-hmm.
journey of becoming brave and confident and building the support network up. You can't, like, I'm not going to say this is easy, but it's just getting it out of you and letting other people in, and reading, listening to podcasts, immersing yourself in stories of people that have been where you're at, that have seen the other side. I'm a firm believer that, like, nothing that any of us are dealing with is something unique. Like,
No.
there's millions of people. I'm a big Stoicism fan. Like, these
Mm-hmm.
people,
Yep.
everything you need to know is in those books of the Stoicism.
Yeah.
So get it out of you and just continue to learn and become brave and listen to other people's stories until you're brave enough to really make a move.
Oh.
I don't know. I
Well,
hope that
Matt,
helps.
that's amazing. I want to thank you for being on. Thank you for your vulnerability and just, like, bringing out this. I have to ask you, would 10 years ago Matt be surprised at this Matt who's talking on a podcast that hundreds of people will listen to about some of the things you talked about today?
Yes and no. I've always I've always I've always like I've always believed that I'm capable of a lot. I mean, when I was a kid, before, like, I really started having problems at school and at home, I was a very vulnerable, open kid. So, like, this has always
Mm-hmm.
been in me. But something over the years, I think it was a lot of, like, when I met my partner, life kind of finally started getting good. I started to have to open up and, like, let people in. And I think that's really a lot when, like, I couldn't just skate just north of rock bottom anymore.
And
I
there's
had to.
north of rock bottom. You're going to hear that again. You're going to hear. I love that so much. Well, Matt, I'm sure that everybody listening wants to connect with you, find out more about you. Like, what's the best way for people to continue to stay connected to you and your story and your journey?
I'd love for you to visit my website, mattgerlach.com. I publish a weekly blog, and I have some fun stuff there. There's a quiz that I would invite anyone to take to kind of find out where you're at on your journey of life right now. And there's much more coming. And then also very active on Instagram. I am Matt Gerlach, and would love to see you all there.
Love it. That'll all be in the show notes. Matt, thank you so much for being on today. Thanks for being with us, bringing your truth and your love and everything else. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to having you back on again sometime in the future and continue to follow you on your journey. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Talking to Cool People with Jason Frizzell. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook and give us a shout out, or take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. If something from today's episode piqued your interest and you'd like to connect, email us at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com. We love hearing from our listeners because you're cool people too.